Welcome in, friends. Thank you for coming back. And if you've only just found this place, thank you for that too. Wherever this finds you, out on a long drive, or somewhere quiet at the end of a long day, or already halfway into the dark before sleep, there is nothing you need to do now but listen. Let the breath slow and the shoulders come down, and let the day set itself down for a while. It will keep. Before we start, the same quiet promise as always. There will never be an ad on this show. Not one, not ever. Nothing here will interrupt you or pull you back out into the bright world against your will. The only thing that keeps that promise alive is you. A quiet follow, a kind word, a minute spent telling one other tired person that this exists. A small thing that keeps a larger thing breathing. I want to begin with the horse, because I think you already have one. Somewhere back in childhood, most of us were handed this picture, and it lodged, and it never quite left. A great horse of wood, tall as a house, standing on the plain outside a walled city at dawn. Maybe you met it in a book with thick pages, a painting of the thing on wheels, its flank curved and dark. Maybe it was a cartoon, or a film, or a teacher's voice. But the picture is always more or less the same. The Greek army has finally sailed away after 10 long years and left this one enormous gift behind on the empty beach. And the city, giddy with relief, drags the horse in through its own gates with ropes, singing, throwing flowers over it, never once guessing. And inside, folded up in the black hollow of the belly, knees to their chests, not making a sound, are the soldiers, waiting for dark, waiting for the city to fall asleep. It is the most famous trick ever told, and you have carried some version of it, quietly, for most of your life. So here is a small, strange thing that almost no one is ever told about that picture. The horse is not in the Iliad. Homer's Iliad, the great ancient poem of the Trojan War, the one everybody means when they say the story comes down to us from Homer, does not contain the wooden horse. Not the trick, not the hollow belly, not the soldiers inside, not the burning of the city, not one line. The poem that we think of as the book of the Trojan War never actually reaches the end of the war at all. It opens in the 10th year, it covers about 7 weeks, and it ends, and I promise you this is true, not with a Greek victory and not with a horse, but with a funeral. The very last line of the Iliad lays a dead Trojan gently in his grave. Sit with that for a moment, gently, because it is the doorway to everything we are going to do tonight. The single most famous thing about the Trojan War is simply not in the oldest and greatest telling of it. It was added later, by other hands, in other centuries, some of them a very long way from Homer. And that is not a disappointment. That, I think, is the wonder. Because once you start pulling the threads, you find that almost every piece of Troy you carry in your heart, the horse, the warning about gifts, the hero with the one weak heel, the face that launched 1,000 ships, was set down by a different age, each one reaching into the story to leave behind the thing it needed most. The Troy you love was not handed to you whole. It was built, slowly, lovingly, over nearly 3,000 years, by people no less human than you and me, and under all of it, in the end, we are going to find a real hill with a real ruin and real ash. So tonight, we are not going to take Troy apart. We are going to sit and watch it get built. Let us begin with what you already carry, and just look at it a little longer than usual. Close your eyes if they are not closed already, and let the childhood picture come up the way it always has. There is a city by the sea, golden in the afternoon light, its walls high and pale. There has been a war outside those walls for 10 years, and it started, they say, over a woman, Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, whose face, the line goes, launched 1,000 ships. Somewhere on the beach there is a hero who cannot be killed, Achilles, invulnerable everywhere but one small place, one heel, the heel his mother held him by when she dipped him, as a baby, into a magic river, so the water touched every part of him but that. And then there is the horse, and the trick, and the single wise voice crying out a warning that no one heeds. Beware of Greeks bearing gifts, and the gates opening, and the long night, and the fall. That is the story, more or less, as almost all of us hold it. And every single piece I just named, the face and the 1,000 ships, the one weak heel, the warning about the gift, the horse itself, every one of them comes from somewhere other than Homer, and most of them come from centuries after him. We are going to visit each one, slowly, and meet the hand that added it. But first we should sit a moment with the poem that started everything, and see what is really inside it, because it is not at all the thing most of us picture. The Iliad opens on a single word. In the Greek it is menin, wrath or rage. Sing, goddess, the wrath of Achilles. It is not, in the end, a poem about a war, and it is certainly not a poem about a horse. It is a poem about one man's anger, and the grief that anger spends, on his own side and on the enemies alike. When it opens, the war is already 9 years old. The great Greek army has been camped on the beach below the city for the better part of a decade, and the poem will not tell you how they got there, and it will not show you how it ends. It reaches in and lifts out about 50 days from the middle of that 10th year, a bitter quarrel between two proud men, a beloved friend sent out to fight in another man's armor, that friend's death, and the terrible, grief-maddened revenge that follows. Whole famous pieces of the story are simply not in it. The launching of the ships is not in it. The death of Achilles is not in it. It is only foretold. The fall of the city is not in it. And the horse is not in it. The Iliad ends, as I said, on an act of grief for the other side. The Trojans washing the body of their fallen prince, Hector, the enemy's greatest man, and burying him while the whole city weeps. So they buried Hector, the last line runs, breaker of horses. A poem about the fall of Troy that ends before Troy falls, on the tears of the losing side. So where then does the horse live in Homer, if not there? It lives, faintly, in the other poem, the Odyssey, the long tale of the voyage home, and even there it survives only as memory, a thing already old, being sung by other people. And I want to slow down and stand inside one of those memories, because it may be the most haunting scene in all of Homer, and almost no one has ever heard it. It is told, years after the war, by Helen herself. Picture the night she remembers. The Greeks appear to be gone, the ships sailed, the long beach empty at last, and the great wooden horse has been brought inside the walls at last, and left standing on the high ground of the city, enormous in the dark. And a woman comes out to it, alone. Helen. She walks around it, slowly, once, and then again, and a third time, her hand trailing along the vast, curved flank of the thing as she goes, the wood still faintly warm from the heat of the day. And then she begins, very quietly, to speak up into the belly of it. And she calls the hidden men by name, each one, in the voice of his own wife. The exact voice, some trick of hers, or some gift of a god. Either way, from inside that black hollow, each man suddenly hears, out of nowhere, in the dark, the voice of the woman he left at home, softly calling him to come out. And one of them cannot bear it. One of them opens his mouth to answer, and in the dark a hand comes over that mouth and presses and holds it shut. Odysseus, pinning the cry back down the man's throat, holding it there until the danger passes and the night goes still again. That is in Homer. That whole scene, the circling, the warm wood, the wives' voices, the hand in the dark, is right there in the Odyssey. It is just not the fall of the city. It is a woman remembering a night and a breath that was very nearly let out. And there is a second memory, gentler and sadder, and I love it as much as any moment in the poems. Years later, a traveller comes, unknown, to a king's feast, and a blind singer is asked to sing something for the hall, and he chooses the tale of the wooden horse and the taking of the city. And as he sings it, beautifully, the way you sing an old, famous story, one man at the table quietly begins to weep. He pulls his cloak up over his head so that no one will see his face, and he lets the tears run behind it, in the dark of his own cloak, while the song goes on. And only the king notices, and only later do we learn who the weeping stranger is. It is Odysseus himself. He has come home in disguise, and he is sitting at a stranger's table, listening to his own worst night sung back to him as after-dinner entertainment. The horse, the killing, all of it. And it undoes him, quietly, under his cloak, where no one can see. That is the horse in Homer. Not a set piece, not a war machine rolling through a gate. A grief. A woman circling a shape in the dark. A soldier weeping into his cloak at the sound of it. Homer does not even call it the Trojan horse. That grand name comes much later. He calls it, simply, the horse of wood. The full story of the horse, the version with the shape and the suspense, the one you know, belong to other poems entirely, and those poems are lost. There was once a whole cycle of them, filling in everything the Iliad skips, the years it leaps over, the death of Achilles, the building of the horse, the sack of the city. Poems with names like the Little Iliad and the Sack of Troy, by poets whose names barely survive. And they are gone, worn away, uncopied, burned or simply forgotten, the way most of everything ever written is eventually forgotten. We know them now mostly from a thin, ancient summary, a few dry sentences describing what each one contained, the way you might know a great lost painting only from a caption in someone else's book. And here is a small, lovely thing that summary happens to preserve. In the oldest version of the horse story we can still reach, from a poet named Arctinus, there is a moment where great serpents come up out of the sea, an omen, a sign from the gods. In the version most of us know, that omen is a warning. It comes to strike down the one priest who told the truth about the horse. But in the older telling, the very same serpents are read the other way, as a sign that the horse should be trusted and brought inside. The same snakes, meaning opposite things, in two tellings a few centuries apart. That is what it looks like to watch a story being shaped by human hands. Even the serpents change their minds about whose side they are on. The horse got its close-up. The version burned into all of us, from a Roman. 700 years after Homer, a poet named Virgil, writing in Latin for the Emperor of Rome, gave the fall of Troy an entire book of his own great poem, the Aeneid. And it is Virgil, not Homer, who hands us the night exactly as we picture it. Come and stand in his version for a moment, because it is the one living in your head. It is dawn on the beach, and the Greek camp is simply gone. The tents struck, the ships vanished over the horizon, and where the army stood there is only this, the horse, huge and silent on the empty sand. And the people of the city come pouring out through the gates they have not dared open in 10 years, laughing, disbelieving, wandering around the great wooden thing, reaching up to touch it. There is a priest, Laocoon, who does not trust it, and who takes a spear and hurls it hard into the curved flank of the horse, and for one held breath, the hollow belly rings, a low sound of hidden metal, of armor and men. And then, before anyone will listen to him, 2 vast serpents come sliding up out of the calm sea and take the priest and his 2 young sons, there on the shore, in front of the whole city. And the last honest warning in Troy dies with him, and the people, terrified, decide the horse must be holy and haul it in. All of that, the empty beach, the ringing flank, the doomed priest, the trusting, cheering city, is Virgil's. Written under the first Roman emperor, by a poet building Rome a noble bloodline out of Troy's ashes, 7 centuries after the war he was describing. And it is Virgil who gives us the line. When the priest hurls his spear, he cries out a warning that has echoed now for 2,000 years. I fear the Greeks, even bearing gifts. Beware of Greeks bearing gifts. It is one of the most quoted lines in the world. It is not Greek. Homer never wrote it. It is a single line of Latin from a Roman poet, 700 years after the war it describes had supposedly ended. Most of us have said some version of it. Almost none of us knew we were quoting a Roman. And what of the hero who cannot be killed? Achilles and his one fatal heel. That, too, is not in Homer. Homer's Achilles is the greatest fighter alive, and he is doomed, and he knows it. He chooses a short and shining life over a long and quiet one, but he is not magic. He bleeds. In the Iliad he is cut and bandaged like any other man. There is no invulnerable skin, no single secret weak spot, no forgotten heel. When the poem foretells his death, it is simply a spear and an arrow at the Scaean gate, and no more. The scene we all picture, the mother holding her baby by one heel and lowering him down into the black water of an underworld river to make him proof against all wounds, appears for the first time in a poem written more than 800 years after Homer by a Roman named Statius. And even Statius does not quite say what we remember. He shows the mother gripping the child by the ankle as she dips him. He never actually says that the ankle was therefore the one place he could be killed. The famous logic, invulnerable everywhere but the heel, was assembled slowly afterward by readers and retellers out of a hint. There is even a quiet possibility, argued by some scholars, that the heel itself is a small slip in translation, that the old word meant ankle, and somewhere across the long journey from language to language, the ankle slid down into the heel and stayed there. So the single most famous weakness in all of storytelling, the Achilles heel, we now use for the one flaw in anything, a bridge, a plan, a person, may rest on a hero who was never invulnerable at all, in a scene that never quite says what we remember, in a word that may have been misread. And still it is true, in the way that matters. We all know exactly what an Achilles heel is. The story built the truth it needed, and we kept it. Then there is her face. The face that launched 1,000 ships. It may be the most beautiful thing anyone has ever written about Helen, and about the whole terrible machinery of that war. The idea that one woman's beauty could put 1,000 ships on the water and send them east to burn a city down. And it is not ancient at all. It was written by an Englishman for the London stage in the age of Shakespeare. The playwright was Christopher Marlowe. The play is Dr. Faustus, and the line is spoken by a man who has sold his soul, gazing at a conjured ghost of Helen brought up before him. Was this the face that launched 1,000 ships and burnt the topless towers of Ilium? 1604, or thereabouts. More than 2,000 years after the war it describes. Homer, for his part, never gives Helen's beauty a number, and barely describes her face at all. His most famous touch is subtler and stranger, and I think finer. He shows you the old men of Troy up on the wall, watching her pass below. And these are old men who have lost sons to her war, and even they murmur to one another that no one could truly blame Greeks or Trojans for suffering so long over such a woman, and then, in the same breath, they wish her gone. He shows you her beauty by showing you tired, grieving old men frightened of it. That is the whole of it. No number, no 1,000 ships, just old men on a wall, afraid. The one faint ancient seed of Marlowe's line is a grim little joke by a much later Greek satirist, who imagined a philosopher down in the underworld holding Helen's bare skull in his hand, turning it over and asking, more or less, "This is what the ship sailed for?" From a skull and a shrug, an Elizabethan built one of the most romantic lines in the language. And even the 1,000 ships is a rounding. Homer, when he actually sits down and counts them, in a long and, I will admit, deeply sleep-inducing catalogue of who brought how many, tallies something closer to 1,186. The face that launched 1,186 ships is, we can agree, a weaker line. Marlowe rounded it off and made it immortal. Now, we have walked all the way around the horse and found that almost none of it sits where we thought it did. That the poem is a poem of wrath and grief. That the horse is a woman's memory and a soldier's tears. That the warning is Roman and the heel is later still and the face is Elizabethan. And you would be forgiven, right about here, for feeling as though the whole thing has come loose in your hands, as though Troy were turning out to be nothing but a great heap of poems, each age adding its favourite ornament, with no solid ground beneath any of it. So let us turn now, slowly, toward the ground. because there is ground. There is a real hill. But before we go to the hill, there is one more piece of the old story worth holding up to the light, because it is the piece where the myth and the ground reach out across the centuries and touch each other, and it is the strangest and most beautiful rhyme in the whole account. It is the horse itself. Why a horse at all? People have wondered for a very long time. Even some of the ancient Greeks found the wooden horse a little hard to swallow. A traveller and geographer named Pausanias, writing in the 2nd century, said plainly that anyone who did not take the Trojans for perfect fools must understand that the horse was really some kind of engine for breaking a wall, remembered afterward as an animal. Others, much later, have wondered whether the horse was a ship. The Greeks came by sea, after all, and one old word for a certain kind of sea-going cargo vessel was, in fact, a horse. Perhaps the city was taken by something that came in off the water, and the name for it hardened, over centuries, into a wooden animal. And then there is the quietest theory of all, and the one that will carry us the rest of the way tonight. There is a god in the old poems named Poseidon. We remember him as the god of the sea, with his trident, but that is only one of his faces. His oldest and most constant title in all of Homer, the word chained again and again to his name, is the Earth Shaker. He is the god of the sea, and the god of horses, and the god of earthquakes, all three at once, bound up in one figure. And in the myth, it is Poseidon who built the great walls of Troy in the first place, long before the war, and Poseidon who, in his anger, helps to bring walls down. So here is the theory, offered softly, as a possibility and nothing more, that a city whose god-built walls were thrown down by the horse is, on one quiet reading, simply a city whose walls were thrown down by Poseidon in his other shape, by the Earth Shaker. That the horse at the gate is the long memory of the ground itself heaving and rising. Hold that thought loosely and carry it with you to the hill, because when we finally dig down into the real ruin of Troy, the very first thing the shovels are going to find is a set of magnificent walls, thrown off their foundations, leaning away from the vertical, with no fire and no army anywhere in sight. The hill is real, and you can stand on it today. It is in the northwest corner of what is now Turkey, a few miles back from the shore, near the mouth of the narrow straits that lead up toward the Black Sea. On the old maps, it is a low, unremarkable mound called Hisarlik, which means, more or less, the place of the fortress. And for most of the last 2,000 years, educated people were fairly sure that Troy had never been a real place at all, that it was a poem city, like a city in a dream, no more findable than the road to the underworld. And then, in the 1870s, a wealthy, restless, self-taught German businessman named Heinrich Schliemann came to that hill with a copy of Homer in one hand and a small army of local workmen and began to dig. Schliemann is a complicated man to admire, and we should be honest about him, gently, because he mixed real vision with real invention. He genuinely believed the poems pointed at true ground, and, in the largest sense, he was right. There was a stacked city under that hill, city built upon fallen city, at least 9 of them piled one on another across 3,000 years, exactly the kind of place the story needed. But he was also a showman, who told stories about himself with the same free hand Virgil told stories about the horse. The most famous of those stories is the treasure. Digging deep into the hill, Schliemann struck gold, a hoard of it, diadems and cups, and thousands of tiny golden beads, and he announced to the world that he had found the personal treasure of King Priam himself, the last king of Troy. And he draped the jewels over his young Greek wife, Sophia, and had her photographed wearing the gold of a queen, dead 3,000 years. It is a wonderful image, and a great deal of it is not true. The gold is real, genuinely ancient, genuinely out of the hill. But by his own later admission, the dramatic discovery scene was embroidered, and the wife who supposedly stood beside him as he lifted the treasure from the earth was, on the day in question, not even in the country. She was in Athens, at her father's funeral. And the deeper problem was quieter, and mattered far more than any love of drama. Schliemann, in his hurry to reach Homer's Troy, had dug too deep. He had cut a great trench straight down through the middle of the hill and out the bottom of the age he was looking for, and the gold he called Priam's turned out to be 1,000 years too old, from a Troy that had risen and fallen a full millennium before any war Homer could have sung. In his rush toward the story, he had trenched clean through the layer where the story, if it happened anywhere, actually happened, and thrown a good deal of it out with the spoil. That layer, the one Schliemann blew past, is the one that matters, and it took slower, more patient hands to read it. The hill, dug carefully over the century that followed, turns out to be a kind of cake of cities, each one built on the flattened rubble of the one before, and the archaeologists number them from the bottom up. Troy 1 at the base, all the way to Troy 9 at the top. And two of those layers, near the middle, are the ones that make the hair rise on your arms, the two best candidates for the city Homer had in his mind. The first is called Troy 6, and Troy 6 is, by any measure, a city worthy of the poem. Great sloping walls of fine-cut limestone, 4 or 5 meters thick and once perhaps 9 meters high, curving around the citadel with watchtowers and grand gates, exactly the kind of well-built, strong-walled city that Homer keeps calling Troy. This was a place of real consequence, and around the year 1300 before our era, it fell. But here is how it fell, and it is not the way the poems tell it. Not by fire, and not by any army. When the archaeologists reached the ruins of those magnificent walls, they found them thrown down and leaning, great sections tilted off the vertical, the inner wall pitched sharply out of true, huge stones toppled in a pattern that no battering ram and no siege ever makes. They found, too, that the Bronze Age builders had set those walls on a deliberate cushion of packed earth, a soft footing laid beneath the stone, and one of the men who dug the site read that as an ancient, careful precaution against one single thing: the shaking of the ground. Later specialists, studying the ruin on their own, came to the same conclusion. The pattern was the signature of an earthquake. No scorch, no ash, no weapons in the rubble, just a great city's walls thrown off their own feet by the earth itself. And I want you to hear quietly what that means, laid down beside the old poems. The city that looks most like Homer's shining, strong-walled Troy, the grandest face on the whole hill, did not fall to a wooden horse or to a Greek army at all. Its god-built walls were thrown down by the Earth-shaker, by Poseidon in his other shape, by the horse at the gate. And then there is the layer just above it, the one that muddies the beautiful picture, because this is real ground and not a poem, and real ground does not tidy itself up for anyone. After the great walls came down, the city was rebuilt, poorer this time and frightened. The archaeologists call it Troy 7A, and it does not look like a proud citadel at all. It looks like a place bracing for a siege. The grand houses have been chopped up into cramped little dwellings, crowded right up against the inside of the walls, and down into the floors of those houses, people have sunk great storage jars, pithoi, the way a household lays in food and water when it is afraid of being shut inside and cut off from the world. And that frightened, crowded city, around the year 1180 before our era, a little over a century after the earthquake, that city burned. Not quietly. The archaeologists found the ruin thick with ash, and in the burned lanes they found human bones lying unburied where the people fell. And pressed into the dirt of one of those streets, a single bronze arrowhead, of the kind used on the Greek mainland far to the west. And scattered here and there through the ruin, small round sling stones left lying in the open, which one excavator read as a quiet, grim little clue. The winners of a fight gather up the spent ammunition to use again. Only the losers leave it lying in the street. So there it is, in the ground, in 2 layers a century apart. A magnificent walled city thrown down by an earthquake. And above it, a poorer, fearful rebuild packed in behind its walls that burned, with the dead left where they lay, and a stranger's arrowhead in the ash. Neither layer is the poem. Both of them, maybe, are lying underneath it. There is one more piece of hard ground, and it comes not from the hill at all, but from tablets of clay, hundreds of miles to the east. Away in the interior, in the Bronze Age, there was a great empire we call the Hittites, who kept careful records pressed into wet clay, records that survived, strangely, by being baked hard as brick in the very fires that later burned their palaces down. And in those Hittite records, historians found a place, a city up in the northwest, right about where Troy stands, that the Hittite scribes called Wilusa. Say it slowly, Wilusa. Homer's own older name for Troy was Ilios, the word hiding inside the title of the Iliad itself, which means simply the poem of Ilios. And the oldest Greek form of that name once carried a sound at the front, now long lost, so that it, too, would once have been spoken as something close to Wilios. Wilusa. Wilios. And in one of those tablets, a treaty, the king of that city of Wilusa is actually named. His name was Alexandu. And one of the names, the other name, of the Trojan prince who ran off with Helen and began the whole war, the prince we usually call Paris, was Alexandros. Alexandu. Alexandros. Now, honesty. Because we owe each other honesty, and this is exactly the kind of place where a person can talk himself into hearing far more than is really there. Not every scholar accepts these echoes. The match between Wilusa and Ilios is now widely, though not universally, accepted. The match between Alexandu and Alexandros is argued over harder, a matter of sounds sliding between languages across centuries, easy to want too much. But set it gently beside the rest. A real hill, holding a real grand city thrown down by the earth, and a real poorer city burned above it. a real empire's records, naming a real city in exactly that place, and a real king in that city whose name rhymes with a Trojan prince's. It is not proof of the war. Nothing is proof of the war. But it is a great deal of true ground beneath a poem that everyone once thought was only a dream. So, was there a real Trojan War? This is the quiet center of the whole thing, and I am not going to pretend to you that the scholars have settled it, because they have not. And the disagreement is a good faith one, between serious people, and it is honestly more restful to hold both hands of it than to force it shut. On one side stand those who read the ground and the tablets and say, yes, something real happened here. A citadel that mattered, sitting on a rich crossing of seas, fought over and burned, in the same violent generation when palaces all across that Bronze Age world were going up in flames. On this reading, the ruin came first, and the song grew slowly out of the ash. The memory of a real fear, polished and enlarged and set to music over the centuries until it became the Trojan War. On the other side stand those who say, be careful. The world Homer sings is really his own later age, dressed up in older bronze. His war is not a chronicle, but a long meditation on one man's rage and the grief it spends. And the burnt hill at Hisarlik is simply where later, hopeful people went looking for a home for a story they already loved. On this reading, the poem came first, and the ruin is almost beside the point. The imagination needed a city, an origin, an ancestry, a mirror to look into, and so it went and found one, and dug it up, and called it Troy. And here, at the very end, is where I would like to leave you. Not with an answer, because there is not one, but with the two endings held side by side, at equal weight, the way the honest evidence really leaves them. Let them both be true tonight. There is nothing to choose between them, and nothing you need to do about it either way. The first ending is the archaeologist's Troy. There is a real hill at Hisarlik, and it really does hold a stacked city that rose and fell and rose again for 2,000 years. One of its grandest faces was shaken off its foundations by the earth around the year 1300, its god-built walls thrown down, no fire, no army, the earth-shaker in his other form. A poorer, crowded, frightened rebuild burned about a century after that, with the dead lying in its lanes and a stranger's arrowhead in the ash, in the very generation when that whole Bronze Age world was ending in flame. And a few days' ride to the east, scribes were writing in clay of a place called Wilusa, and a king called Alexandu. On this reading, something real happened on that hill. A citadel, a fear, a fire. And over the slow centuries the memory of it was polished and enlarged and sung, by Homer and then by others, and others after them, until it became the Trojan War. The ruin came first. The song grew up out of the ash. And the second ending is the poet's Troy. All the poem came first, and the ruin is almost incidental. The war Homer sings is not a report, but a meditation on wrath and grief and the strange tenderness that even enemies can feel for each other in the small hours of a long war. He barely mentions the horse. He never mentions the heel. The 1,000 ships and the face that launched them belong to a Roman and an Elizabethan and a satirist turning a skull over in his hand. On this reading, Troy is the place the human imagination needed. A shared beginning, a mirror, a home for everything we feel and cannot otherwise say. And the burnt hill in Turkey is only where later, hopeful ages went looking for somewhere to lay it all down. The song came first, and the ruin is only where we went to visit it. And you can believe both. That, I think, is the quiet gift of the whole long story. There is a real hill, with real ash and real bones and real thrown down walls. And there is a horse that was never in the poem, a horse built up over 3,000 years by Homer and Virgil and Statius and Marlowe, and a numberless crowd of ordinary people who loved the tale and could not help adding to it, each one leaving behind the single piece they needed most. The warning about gifts, from a Roman building his empire a past. The one weak heel, from readers who wanted their hero both perfect and mortal. The face and the 1,000 ships, from a playwright in London reaching for the most beautiful thing he could think to say. And underneath all of it, quietly waiting the whole time, the real ground. A great city's walls thrown off their feet by a god who was also an earthquake, remembered, just possibly, as a horse at the gate. The story did not shrink tonight. I hope you can feel that. We did not take Troy away from you. We only found out how many hands it took to make it. How many centuries of tired, hopeful, ordinary people needed this story badly enough to keep on building it, long after the last stone of the real city had fallen. The horse is not in the poem, and it is realer than ever. Both of those are true at once, and you can rest tonight in the gap between them. That is where I will leave the two Troys, the one sleeping under the hill and the one we are all still adding to, side by side, in no hurry, with nothing left for you to decide. Thank you for spending this quiet hour with an old story, and with me. Whether it kept you company out on the road, or filled a quiet hour somewhere, or carried you the last little way down towards sleep, that is the whole of what it was for. Rest easy now, wherever this finds you. The walls will hold. Until next time, friends.